Okay, are we ready? Let's start with chapter 13. Let me first kind of bring you, let's just give a brief review of what we've dealt with, okay? In chapter 8, we dealt with the desire of the nation to replace Samuel, essentially, okay? They're not happy with Samuel's sons, and they asked Samuel to give them a king. That's in chapter 8. And of course, we know that Samuel is not very happy about that. And then there's the whole encounter of Samuel and the donkeys and with Saul and everything, where at the end of the beginning of chapter 10, we have Samuel privately anointing Saul as king, but this is not yet public, okay? Then we have a number of Samuel then gives Saul a number of different things that are going to happen to him that are kind of signs, okay, for the fact that he just anointed him is really true. Okay, and he predicts all these things that are going to happen to him, and they're exactly what happened. But as one of the last things he says to him, Samuel, in terms of all these signs, and it probably pays to take a look at this quickly now. And this is chapter 10, verse 8. Okay, chapter 10, verse 8. At that point, Samuel says as follows: after that, you are to go down to Gilgal ahead of me, and I will come down to you to present burnt offerings and offer sacrifices of well-being. Wait 7 days until I come to you and instruct you what you are to do next. Okay, keep in mind that is in chapter 10. And then we have the continuation in chapter 10 continues with Saul actually being crowned king publicly. Okay, chapter 11, we have the battle with Nahash, the Ammonite king, and we already studied that. After that battle, we have again, and this begins at the end of chapter 11. Samuel says, let's go to the Gilgal and renew the kingdom. And we questioned that at that point, and we gave possible answers of when this might have happened, and maybe this happened earlier, or maybe whatever. We discussed those possibilities then. That was at the end of chapter 11. And that goes on into chapter 12, this whole idea of, Samuel speaks to the nation and crowning Saul again, okay? And then we move on to chapter 13, which is what we're going to do today, okay? So with all that background in mind, now we're entering chapter 13. So chapter 13, first of all, begins with a very strange statement that many, many people question. Saul was a year old, and he ruled Israel for 2 years. He was a year old when he became king, and he reigned over Israel for 2 years. Now, many people believe that there's just a word missing here, because the way it's written in Hebrew, it's Ben Shana, which just like that, it would be a year old. But if there was a word missing, you could in the same Hebrew say Ben Shmonim Shana. He was 80 years old. In other words, if you don't add a number, if you only have the word year, then it means 1 year. But the same word year, it doesn't have to be a plural. That's what the way Hebrew grammar works. You don't have to say 80 years. You can say 80 year. I know it sounds weird in English, but in Hebrew, it's fine. So in other words, there is a theory that there really was a word here. Well, however old he was when he became king, that number is missing. Well, it's possible. Let's put that aside. And he ruled for 2 years on Israel. Now we know for a fact he ruled for more than 2 years. Okay, we haven't even gotten to the rest of the story. We have many more. We've had the beginning of his escapades, but there's lots more coming until he dies. There's no question. All these events that are talking about Saul as king is more than 2 years. Okay, so that is a problematic verse. It is also a problematic verse for a different reason. This seems to be a summary verse. Okay, And we see that very often, particularly in the book of Kings, when we have lots and lots of kings, that they will say how long each king ruled and when he died. And sometimes they'll say how old he was when he became king, not necessarily, but it's a very common thing. And that kind of statement will be very often either at the beginning of the reign or at the end of the reign, so, some kind of summary. Whereas here, it's in the middle. So what kind of a statement like this is in the middle of the stories of Saul? So this is questions. Let's put that aside for now. Okay. And now we're going to go into a story of the battle with the Philistines. Okay. So what have we had until now? We've had a battle with Ammonites. But now we're going to have a battle with Philistines. So let's read this. And as we're reading it, I will raise some of the questions and issues that come up. Okay. Saul picked 3,000 Israelites, of whom 2,000 were with Saul in Michmash and in the hill country of Bethel, and 1,000 with Jonathan in Gibeah of Benjamin. Now, these are all parts of Benjamin. Everything we're talking about here is north of Jerusalem. Okay, so anybody who knows the area today, there's a modern community of Bethel, there's a modern community of Michmash, and there is a community called Geva Binyamin, which is the same as Gibeah. Okay, it's all in this area of what was biblical Benjamin, the part just north of Jerusalem. Okay, and of course, we know Benjamin is Saul's tribe, so it's very close to home for him. Okay, the rest of the troops he sent back to their homes. So he's sitting there between the two of them, between Saul and Jonathan, we have 3,000 soldiers. Jonathan struck down the Philistine prefect in Geba, in other words, the head or, whatever, the prince of Philistines or whatever, the general. And the Philistines heard about it. Saul had the ram's horn sound throughout the land, saying, let the Hebrews hear. So we have an immediate victory here where Jonathan is able to kill the general or whatever he is. And of course, Saul is going to use it so that everybody should know is a battle cry. Wow, we've already started. We are getting going. When all Israel heard that Saul had struck down the Philistine prefect and that Israel had incurred the wrath of the Philistines, all the people rallied to Saul at Gilgal. Now, Gilgal is down at the bottom of the hill. It's in the Jordan Valley. Okay, so clearly they were both up in the mountains, and then for some reason Saul goes down to Gilgal, and we've met Gilgal before. Gilgal is where the place where Samuel said, let us restore the kingdom. It's also the place where I read to you at the beginning from chapter 10, where at the end of the instructions that Samuel gives to Saul before he goes out and meets all these different signs, the final one is that he wants Saul to meet him at the Gilgal, to wait for him for a week, and then follow the instruction. Okay, this is very important to keep in mind as we're reading here. So here we have Saul going down to the Gilgal. Okay, the Philistines in turn gathered to attack Israel, 30,000 chariots and 6,000 horsemen and troops as numerous as the sands of the seashore. All these people against 3,000 soldiers, quite outnumbered. They marched up and encamped at Michmash east of Bet Aven. So basically what happened is Saul goes down with his army to Gilgal, and the Philistines come into where Saul was. Okay, they come into Michmash. When the men of Israel saw that they were in trouble, for the troops were hard pressed, the people hid in caves, among thorns, among rocks, in tunnels, and in cisterns. Some Hebrews crossed the Jordan to the territory of Gad and Gilead. Now, this Gilgal is down the bottom, right across the Jordan River. That's where they went. Saul was still at Gilgal, and the rest of the people rallied to him in alarm. Okay, so we have a problem. Some of the people are disappearing. Some of them are still sticking with Saul, ready to do battle. He waited 7 days, the time that Samuel had set. When did Samuel give this instruction? He gave the instruction way back in chapter 10. After chapter 10, there's no meeting in the Gilgal, no waiting for Samuel. They go to battle against Nahash. And then they crown Saul in the Gilgal. What is this about? And it really raises a very serious question, because it seems to me, it seems to everybody who reads this, that when Samuel gave the original instruction to Saul in chapter 10, It sounds like it's an immediate thing. You're going to meet this one, you're going to meet this one, you're going to meet this one, then go to the Gilgal, wait for me to bring a sacrifice, and then wait for your instructions. Okay, and he's doing that here. How do we know it's the same thing? Okay, because it's number one, it says, where does it say? Where am I? He waited 7 days, the time that Samuel had set. It's definitely referring back to that same thing, but we're going to continue. But when Samuel failed to come to Gilgal and the people began to scatter, Saul said, bring me the burnt offering and the sacrifice of well-being, and he presented the burnt offering. So what happens? He doesn't wait for Samuel. He did wait. He waited 7 days, which is the amount of time Samuel said to wait. It seems Samuel's late. Is he a few hours late? Is he a few days late? It's not clear, but it's clear he waited. And why does he stop waiting and he brings the sacrifice anyway? Because he's sitting there with an already diminished army. He needs to go to battle against the Philistines, and people are losing faith. And he feels, oh my gosh, if there's any hope for me to rally the troops, we need to bring them confidence that God is on their side. And what better way to do that is to bring the sacrifice. So I'm sorry, Samuel, that you didn't come, but I'm about to lose my army. So what can I do? He had just finished presenting the burnt offering when Samuel arrived, and Saul went out to meet him and welcome him. But Samuel said, what have you done? Saul replied, I saw the people leaving me and scattering. You had not come at the appointed time, and the Philistines had gathered at Michmash. And Michmash is right up there on the hill overlooking Gilgal. Okay? They're really being threatened. I thought the Philistines would march down against me at Gilgal before I had entreated the Lord. So I forced myself to present the burnt offering. It sounds normal, it sounds legitimate. On the other hand, he didn't obey Samuel. Samuel answered Saul, you acted foolishly in not keeping the commandments that the Lord your God laid upon you. Otherwise, the Lord would have established your dynasty over Israel forever. But now your dynasty will not endure. The Lord will seek out a man after his own heart, and the Lord will appoint him ruler over his people, because you did not abide by what the Lord had commanded you. What is Samuel telling Saul? Number one, you sinned. Number two, you sinned in such a big way that you have proven to God that you are not the right man to be the king, and therefore God is going to find another king. Now, we haven't yet done chapter 15, but chapter 15 talks about the command to fight against Amalek. And we know, if you remember, if you don't remember, we're going to just study it in detail when we get there. But it is at the point at which Saul sins and doesn't fulfill his responsibilities with regard to Amalek that Samuel then says to her, that's it, you're losing the kingdom. So wait a second. If he'd already lost the kingdom here, why is he giving him the same punishment for a completely different sin when he's talking about Amalek? So again, this creates questions. We're just asking questions right now. Okay, and then we have verse 15. Samuel rose and went up from Gilgal to Gibeah of Benjamin. In other words, what is he doing now? He's going back up to the battlefield. He's going right back where he started with his men. But how many people does he have? Saul numbered the troops who remained with him, about 600 strong. Okay, so between the two of them, they had started with 3,000. They're down now to 600. The raiders came out of the Philistine camp in three columns. One column headed for the Ophrah road that leads to the district of Shual. Another column headed for the Bet Horon road, and the third column headed for the border road that overlooks the valley of Sboim toward the desert. Again, we're all in the area of Benjamin, north of Jerusalem, coming up towards the tribal boundary with Ephraim. But we're basically in Benjamin, which goes all the way across. It is, let's say, Michmash is the furthest east of Benjamin on the mountain. Down below is Gilgal. And from Michmash going west are all these places that we're talking about here. Ophrah, Shual, Beit Horon. By the way, there is an Ophrah today. There is a Beit Horon today. It's fabulous. It's just fabulous that these original biblical towns are now have been reestablished, and they're wonderful communities. I invite you all to come and visit us in these communities. Anyway, so this is the battles going across the Benjamin area, which is not very tall. North to south is not very big, but east to west, it is quite big. Okay. And then we have, starting in verse 19, we have background information that we don't know from before. No smith was to be found in all the land of Israel, for the Philistines were afraid that the Hebrews would make swords or spears. We are now learning about a decree that the Philistines had set against Israel. Now, one thing, let's keep something in mind. We came out of this, we have been studying Samuel, we studied Judges before that, and the biggest problem that we had towards the end of Judges, and certainly at the beginning of Samuel, is the Philistines. This is not the first time we're meeting the Philistines. In fact, if you'll recall, at the very beginning of the book of Samuel, there's a major battle against the Philistines, where the Ark of the Covenant is taken into battle, and the Ark of the Covenant is then captured by the Philistines, and we studied about how that ends up coming back to the people of Israel. But the Philistines are not new to us, okay? And it seems that what this situation is describing, a situation that's probably been going on since the beginning of the book of Samuel, and possibly even from the end of the book of Judges. Because as long as the Philistines have been ruling in the land, they are very oppressive. And one of the things they're doing is trying to be sure that there will be no rebellion against them. What's the best way to figure out, to ensure no rebellion? Make sure the people you are controlling don't have any weapons. So what have they said? It says here, the Philistines were afraid that the Hebrews would make swords or spears. So all the Israelites had to go down to the Philistines to have their plowshares, their mattocks, axes, and coulters sharpened. In other words, this even affected their ability to farm, because all of the things you farm with are sharp tools, and they wouldn't let them had to go. The Philistines were the one that would supervise even the sharpening of the plows to make sure that they could not turn these plows, which they would need the same sharpening tools, okay, to turn the plows into swords. They kept control of the sharpening tools. The charge for sharpening was a ping for plowshares, mattocks, three-pronged forks, and axes, and for setting the goads. Okay, we don't really know what this cost means, but clearly it was very oppressive. It was kind of like having to pay a tax every time you plowed your field. Thus, on the day of the battle, no sword or spear was to be found in the possession of any of the troops with Saul and Jonathan. Only Saul and Jonathan had them. Okay, now I'm going to ask another question. This clearly is a situation that's very important to understand, is they're about to go into battle with the Philistines. But we just read in a previous chapter that they went to battle against Nahash, the Ammonite. And there's no mention there of not having weapons. So exactly what's going on? How is it that here they don't have weapons? Beforehand, they did have weapons. And this whole time, the Philistines are in charge. Okay, what's going on? Anyway, then we have them. This is the situation. Now the Philistine garrison march out to the pass of Michmash. Okay? And then when we go further into chapter 14 is going to detail for us the actual battle of Michmash. And we see here there becomes a separation between Jonathan and Saul. I'm going to read this very quickly. Okay, one day Jonathan, son of Saul, said to the attendant who carried his arms, "Come, let us cross over to the Philistine garrison on the other side." But he did not tell his father. Okay, now Saul was staying on the outskirts of Gibeah under the pomegranate tree of Migron, and the troops with him numered about 600. So we know that already. Actually, I'm going to skip a lot of this stuff, but one of the things that's very important, look at verse 3, at the end of verse 3, the troops did not know that Jonathan had gone. Okay, this is something, this whole issue of Jonathan and Saul and what happened here, we're going to take that up next week. It's important to understand that there is a battle here. And we're going to just skip this. We're going to come back to this last week. Where I just want to, okay, I'd like to take up again. No. Okay, so I want to go back. Now I want to skip ahead to, let's see, verse 43. No, not verse 43. That's on the other issue. I'm sorry about this. Okay. Verse 46. Okay. Saul broke off his pursuit of the Philistines, and the Philistines returned to their homes. Okay. Basically, Saul defeated the Philistines, but they're still around. After Saul had secured his kingship over Israel, he waged war on every side against all his enemies, against the Moabites, the Ammonites, Edomites, the Philistines, and the kings of Sova. And wherever he turned, he worsted them. He was triumphant, defeating the Amalekites and saving Israel from those who plundered it. And then it goes on to tell us about the names of his sons, his family. Final verse of chapter 14, there was bitter war against the Philistines all the days of Saul, and whenever Saul noticed any stalwart man or warrior, he would take him into his service. So first of all, this seems to be this seems to be summarizing the battle of the Philistines. And it actually has to be, this particular summary has to be actually written or referring not just to the battle of the Philistines, but other battles, because it says here, waged war on every side against all his enemies, the Moabites, the Ammonites. Now we could say, we know about the battle of the Ammonites from before, but we don't know about battle of the Moabites, the Philistines, and we certainly don't know anything about the Amalekites. That only comes in chapter 15. Okay, so we have to basically say that right here it's a summary, but it's a summary that refers not only to what we already know, but what we don't know yet. But the point of this is the last verse. There was bitter war against the Philistines all the days of Saul. Okay, so basically I've raised a number of questions and also given you a number of hints. The questions, and I think the most difficult question was, what is this thing about going to Gilgal and waiting for Samuel? Could it possibly have happened after the battle with the Nachash of the Ammonites and all the other stuff we read about? Or didn't it have to be right after he departed from Samuel? I mean, he says, wait for me there. What did he mean? Go somewhere 2 years from now, go to Gilgal and wait for me? Does that make any sense? Okay, so in light of this question and some of the other questions that we have raised here and some of the other hints we've given, I read a wonderful article that I would like to share with you. It's by someone named Yosef Goel Didi. I have no idea who he is, but he wrote a very interesting theory, and I'd like to share it with you. What he is saying is that the chronology of the events are not the order in which they are written. Now, if we want to just see, I summarized this earlier, but I will say it again. How does it work? Starting with chapter 10, we have Saul being crowned king initially, the public crowning of Saul in chapter 10. The next in order is the war against Nachash, the Ammonite. Next in order is renewal of the kingdom of, again, going to Gilgal, let's renew the kingdom. Next in order is the story we just read today in chapter 13, continuing into chapter 14, which we're going to do more in depth next week. And finally, the verses that we just read in chapter 14, some kind of a summary about Saul. That's the way it was written. Now, he's going to give a different order. And basically what he's doing, he's going to say, what we've read here in chapter 13 and what continues into 14, the battle against the Philistines happens right after he becomes king. It happens right after chapter 10. Okay, so first, let's show how the sequence of events works. So first of all, and there's some interesting other things here to point out. As we read before, it was in chapter 8 that we first see the nation asking for a king. But what they're really saying, chapter 8, verse 1, when Samuel grew old, he appointed his son judges over Israel. Okay. And in verse 5, the elders of Israel turn to Samuel and say, therefore, appoint a king for us to, okay, well, the word in my English says to govern us like all nations, but the actual word is judge us, to judge us. In other words, basically what this fellow is pointing out, that when they turn to Samuel, yes, they're looking for a king, but the main thing that they need is a judge. They're finding that the sons of Samuel, who are supposed to act as judges, are not acting as judges. And so their initial thing is, yes, to act in judges, but also they're going to be interested in a king to lead them in battle. Okay, now, what actually happens is the first time that Samuel meets with Saul, okay, after he crowns him king privately, okay, we have that chapter 10, which are all those, the signs and all that kind of stuff. And right after that, it says what we read earlier. Let's see where that was, where he says, wait for me. He says in verse 8, after that, you are to go down to Gilgal ahead of me, and I will come down to you to present burnt offerings, wait 7 days, etc. And then Saul goes off and he meets all the people he's supposed to meet. Okay. And that happens. And what happens right after that? We have Samuel gathering everybody in the Mitzpah. And this is where he first crowns Saul king publicly. And at the very end of that story, at the very end in chapter 10, we learn about these troublemaker types who are saying, what, this guy? How is this guy going to save us? Okay. Now, chapter 11 immediately then goes on to Nachash. Okay. And the way we interpreted that was that, they didn't think he was worth anything. And then he does what he does in Nachash and everything is well. However, what this fellow was saying, what should come immediately after, is the story of fighting the Philistines. Now, how does this solve our problem? Number one, the first verse. Saul was 1 year old or whatever, and he ruled 2 years. It could be that what this first verse is saying is that in the first year of his, we're starting now the story in his first year of his kingdom. And we're talking about what happened in the first 2 years. Okay. And that is definitely something that can be an interpretation of that first verse. Next, when we have here that before he gets this army ready, and what does he do first? He goes to the Gilgal. Now he's not in the Gilgal. He is up in the mountain in Michmas, in Beit El. Why would he leave the mountain to go down to the Gilgal? To wait for Samuel. This is right away. And also when Samuel says to him in chapter in chapter 10, go down and wait for me there. He's saying also, and then I will instruct you on what you're going to do. So what this fellow is saying is that he saw he's in trouble with the Philistines. He knows this is right after he became king. He knows that this is something he needs to take care of. He goes down to the Gilgal to wait for Samuel, to wait for him to bring the offerings and to receive instruction on how to deal with the Philistines. He waits and he waits and he waits, and Samuel doesn't come. And we know what happens. The people get restless and they're leaving and he's losing his army. So he goes ahead and he brings the sacrifice. Okay. What happens afterwards? Everything we read in chapter 13, Samuel is very annoyed with him and he tells him, that's it. You have lost the kingdom. Okay. What happens next? The next thing is, one second. The next thing now goes back to the battle with Nachash. Now let's go and take a look of what that battle looks like. This is chapter 11. Okay. How does it begin? Nachash the Ammonite marched up and besieged Yavesh Gilad. All the men of Yavesh Gilad said to Nachash, make a pact with us, etc. And when the messengers came to Gibeah, Saul and gave this report in the hearing of all the people broke into weeping. Okay. Now, the message goes all over the country. It doesn't go to Saul. It happens to come among other places to Gibeah. And what do we learn here? Saul was just coming from the field, driving the cattle. And Saul asked, why are the people crying? He's not we noticed before that he wasn't acting as king. He's still farming and working with his cattle. According to this interpretation, it is after he messed up with the Philistines, and Samuel says, that's it, you've lost the kingdom. He goes home. He goes home and he's a farmer and he's not acting as a king anymore. He's just been deposed. And then we have Nachash attacking Yavesh Gilad, and there's a problem. And why don't they send to Saul? Because Saul has been deposed. There is back to the old situation. There's no king. Saul's just a farmer, okay? And they go to him, and he then steps up. He takes the initiative. He takes over the army, and he does, okay? And at that point in verse 12, the people then said to Saul, Who was it that said, Shall be king over us? Hand the men over, we put him to death. But Saul repented, no man should be put to death this day, for this day the Lord has brought victory to Israel. Samuel said to the people, Go, let us go to Gilgal, and there inaugurate the monarchy. He is renewing the monarchy because he deposed him after the Philistines. And after the success of the battle against the Ammonites, he says, you know what, Saul, maybe you do belong to be king after all. Okay? And then it kind of goes on. The next one is this, as I mentioned, they renew the kingdom and goes on to chapter 12, which is Samuel's whole discussion and his problems with the kingdom. And he's warning the nation of Israel, you have to make sure to do the right thing. And this is verse 24 of that chapter 12. This is probably one of the most important verses. Above all, you must revere the Lord and serve him faithfully with all your heart, and consider how grandly he has dealt with you. For if you persist in your wrongdoing, both you and your king shall be swept away. He is talking to the nation. He is not talking to the king. He is talking about them. Okay, now you got your king back. God was not happy with him. He helped you. You want this king. Okay, it may work, it may not. But he's saying to the nation, it will definitely not work if you don't continue being faithful to God. Okay? And that ends with that. That's okay. And after that, we go to the end of chapter 14, which was the summary that we read today, towards the end of chapter 14, where we talk about, how all the different people he fought against. He fought this one and that one, etc. And verse 52, there was a bitter war against the Philistines all the days of Saul. It began with the Philistines, it ended with the Philistines, and the next chapter we're going to talk about the Amalek, which is very, very critical. What do we do with the fact that it's very nice that this makes a lot more sense chronologically, but we are not advocates of the theories that the Bible was written with a bunch of different authors and some very sloppy editor just kind of hodgepodge them together. This is not where we are at all. Okay, if something is written out of chronological order, it doesn't mean that it's a mistake. It means that this is how it should have been written. What does that mean? It means sometimes, and you know this in modern fiction, okay, there's so many different literary devices such as flashback and all kinds of things that a story will be written out of order for different reasons. So we have to find a reason. What is the reason that this is written out of order? Now, this same fellow puts forward a reason that I think makes a lot of sense. He puts forward a couple of reasons. He says, well, it could be any reason, I'm not quite sure, but he puts forth this reason, and I think this one makes a lot of sense. Basically, what he's saying is that what happens here, he takes the story of chapter 11, okay, and he just that's the chapter that's out of order. Okay, it should have been chapter 10, and then chapter 12, and then chapter 13. I think, yeah. And basically, he took this chapter that we did today, chapter 13, and put it at the end instead of putting it at the beginning. Okay, everything else really remains the same. So why is that? Okay, by putting it at the end, what do you achieve? Right before you go into the story of Amalek, where God is going to punish Saul and say, the kingdom will be taken away from you. Right before that story, you have God saying the very same thing, but at the very beginning of Saul's reign. And that creates a very important message, okay? Especially if you understand that this happened at the beginning. That from the beginning, there was a fatal flaw in Saul's reign. The fatal flaw began with, he goes to the Gilgal and he doesn't wait for Samuel. And remember what was so important at the end of chapter 12, that Samuel says to the nation, the most important thing, you have to fear God and worship him with all your heart and soul. Okay? He's saying that to the nation, but he's also saying it to Saul. Saul, you are a king. Yes, you're a general. Yes, you know how to fight a battle. But if you're given an instruction from God, that takes precedence. And as soon as Saul preferred to listen to, what happened? He's afraid. He's looking up the hill. There's the Philistines that are about to come down. He says, I can't wait for Samuel. Let's be practical here. I have an army to lead. I can't wait. If I wait, I'm going to lose the battle. And Samuel sees in this a fatal flaw. God sees in this a fatal flaw, because not the person, you're supposed to be trusting God more than you trust your army. And if he's been given a particular instruction, wait for Samuel, then do your sacrifice, then get the instruction from Samuel, that would have not only given him a victory, but it would have given him the kingdom forever. But it's that same fatal flaw that we will find in Amalek, where the same exact thing happens. Samuel tells him exactly what to do, and he does 99% of it. He messes up on one thing. It's the same exact problem, and we will discuss that in greater detail, not next week, but the week after probably. But that is really what's happening. So by putting those two sections together, we understand, okay, that there is a recurring theme here, that Saul is not listening to God's instruction, and we're seeing this time and again. Now, there could definitely be other reasons why it would be, out of order, and certainly if any of you can come with reasons out of order. But what I really liked about this theory, more than anything, it solved for me the issue of the Gilgal. When is it that he's supposed to go to the Gilgal? It also solved for me the idea of renewing the kingdom. Why were we renewing the kingdom? Well, it only makes sense if he's renewing the kingdom after he was actually fired from the kingdom, and that we only have at the end of the story of the Philistines. So those are the two, things that we gain from this. But of course, this is just one theory. You're certainly welcome to reject it. Do with it whatever you will. If any of you have other ideas, welcome to hear it. We will take up next week with chapter 14, where we're focusing on chapter 14 of this whole thing about Saul and Jonathan in two different places and what goes on there. That's what we're going to be doing next week. And then we're going to move on after that to the continuation of Saul and his rapid decline, starting with the Battle of Amalek. Okay. Any questions? Turn on your mics if you want. Everybody's smart today. Good. Okay. Well, it was wonderful seeing you all again, and see you again next week, please, God. Oh, wait, Debbie, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, thank you. This is wonderful. So thank you for your time. The teaching has I've just been getting so much from it. But you said something interesting right there in the very end. And it seems like to be a pattern time and again with all these leaders that what happened was they lost faith in their people, or lost faith in their people's faith. And so that was you were talking about the decline. Same thing happened with Moses. When Moses wasn't able to go into the promised land, it was because he lost faith in the people. He lost faith in the people's faith. So again, thank you so much. This is so beautiful how it all ties in. And that seems to be a pattern that's repeated throughout the time that these leaders are leading their people.
Well, I think that's very interesting that you talk about not losing faith in God, but losing faith in the people's faith. Right. I'm not sure if that's something that works here, though. I think you're right about Moses. I'm not sure if it works here, because here we have the people themselves are dispersing. So right.
Well, I meant the people losing faith in God, right. The leaders losing faith in the people losing their faith in God.
Right. No, but I'm saying I think that Saul is right in that he sees for himself that his soldiers are losing faith in God because they're dispersing. He's left with 600 when he had 3,000. Now, True. You could say, well, look at Gideon, right? And with his 300, and it's right. Not the numbers, it's the quality of these men and their faith. So you could read right. It that way. It could be that that was what was expected of him. But on the other hand, you have this other idea that maybe he was right in losing faith in their faith. But the question is that a reason to lose faith in God? God right. may still be with those who still have the faith, which would be those 600, still be with him as the leader, and that kind of thing.
Hello, Sondra, and greetings from the United States, Naples, Florida. And thank you very much for today. You had 19 of us. And be safe out there. Be safe.
Thank you, Richard. Good to hear from you. Okay, good night, everybody.
Yes, and
we'll
so
see you
glad you're
next week.
feeling better.
Thank you, Debbie. Bye-bye.
I hope you enjoyed that film. And we have lots more film content and emails and articles that I'm sure you will enjoy as well. Check out our website at cfoic.com and subscribe to our newsletter. You can do that right from the homepage. I know you will really enjoy the content that will land in your inbox on a regular basis. Hope to see you soon.